Celeste Beaumont had lost all hope, sitting motionless in her wheelchair as thunder crashed against the Montana ranch house windows. The expensive Eastern doctors packed their leather bags downstairs, their voices drifting up through the floorboards like funeral prayers. Nothing more we can do for her. The paralysis is permanent. Perhaps it would be merciful if she had simply died in that accident. 6 months. 6 months since the horse threw her during that desperate race to prove herself worthy of the cattle buyer's respect. 6 months since her spine shattered against the unforgiving Montana earth. 6 months of watching her father's fortune drain away on useless treatments while the ranch hands whispered that she was cursed. Maybe they were right. The storm outside matched the tempest in her chest. Rain lashed the glass as if nature itself was weeping for what she had become. A broken thing. A burden. The half-breed daughter of a cattle baron who could no longer even stand to face the men who dismissed her. Her bedroom door had become a prison gate. The wheelchair her throne of shame. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy boots on hardwood. Not the polished shoes of another doctor coming to poke at her lifeless legs. These steps carried weight. Purpose, a knock, gentle but firm. "Miss, I'm here about the cattle." The voice carried an Irish lilt weathered by years under the western sun. Celeste didn't turn from the window. More thunder rolled across the plains, shaking the glass. "The doctors are leaving," she said to her reflection. "There's nothing left to heal." The door opened anyway. In the glass she saw him enter, tall, lean, with hands that spoke of honest work. His coat dripped rainwater onto her Persian rug. A veterinary bag hung from his shoulder like a soldier's pack. He moved closer. His reflection joined hers in the storm-darkened window. "I'm Ezra Thornfield." He set down his bag. "Your father sent for me about the sick cattle, but I heard about your condition from the hands." "My condition?" The words tasted bitter. "Is that what they're calling it now?" Ezra knelt beside her wheelchair. His eyes were gray as the storm clouds, but warmer, sadder. He had known loss too. She could see it in the lines around his eyes, the careful way he held his shoulders. "I'll help her," he whispered. The words hit her like lightning. Simple, direct. No grand promises or medical jargon. Just a quiet certainty that cut through 6 months of despair. "You're a horse doctor. I'm a healer." Celeste finally turned from the window to face him fully. His beard was streaked with premature gray. His hands bore old scars. This was not a man who made empty promises. "The best doctors in Denver said I'll never walk again." "I'm not from Denver." Thunder crashed again, closer this time. The storm was moving over them, through them. Ezra's gray eyes never wavered from hers. "What makes you think you can succeed where they failed?" "Because I've seen men with worse injuries learn to walk again." His voice carried the weight of memory. During the war, soldiers with shattered spines who the surgeons wrote off as dead men walking. Some of them proved the surgeons wrong. The war. That explained the scars on his hands, the careful way he moved. A battlefield medic turned veterinarian, a man who had learned healing in the crucible of violence. "Why did you stop treating people?" Something flickered across his face. Pain, fresh as an open wound. His wife. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands stilled. "That's not important now." He stood, retrieving his bag. "What matters is whether you're willing to fight." "I don't know how to fight this." "Then I'll teach you." Heavy footsteps in the hallway announced her father's approach. Thaddeus Beaumont filled the doorway like a mountain of grief and desperation. His cattle empire had been built through iron will and ruthless determination. But his daughter's accident had broken something inside him. "Mr. Thornfield," his voice was rough with exhaustion, "I appreciate you coming, but the doctors have made their verdict clear." "Your doctors treated symptoms," Ezra replied. "I treat the person." Thaddeus moved to Celeste's side, his massive hand gentle on her shoulder. The richest man in the territory, reduced to helpless worry by his daughter's suffering. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Rehabilitation. Strengthening, teaching her body to work around the damage instead of surrendering to it." "And if you fail?" The question hung in the air like gunsmoke. Celeste watched Ezra's face for any sign of doubt. Found none. then she'll be no worse than she is now. That's not entirely true. The new voice came from the hallway. Dr. Harrison Webb entered with the authority of established medicine. His expensive suit and gold watch marked him as a man of science and social standing. Unproven treatments could cause additional damage. False hope is often more cruel than honest acceptance. Ezra turned to face the territorial doctor. Two men of healing, separated by philosophy and pride. What would you recommend, doctor? The territorial asylum has excellent facilities for cases like hers. She would be comfortable there. Safe. Safe. The word landed like a death sentence. Celeste had heard whispers about the asylum, a place where inconvenient people disappeared behind stone walls and iron bars. No. The word escaped her lips before she could stop it. I won't go there. Sweetheart, her father began. I said no. She gripped the wheels of her chair, knuckles white with determination. If Mr. Thornfield believes he can help, then I want to try. Dr. Webb stepped forward, his face grave with professional concern. Miss Beaumont, this man is a veterinarian. What he's suggesting is not medicine, it's wishful thinking. Then what do you suggest, doctor? Ezra's voice remained calm. That she simply accept defeat. I suggest she accept reality. The storm outside was weakening, but the one inside her father's house was just beginning. Celeste could feel the current of conflict building between the two men. Her fate hung in the balance of their opposing philosophies. Thaddeus looked between them, a man caught between hope and pragmatism. His fortune could buy almost anything except his daughter's healing. How long? He asked Ezra. Give me 3 months, and if there's no improvement, then I'll leave and Dr. Webb can proceed with his recommendation. 3 months. 90 days to reclaim her life or lose it forever to the asylum's stone walls. Very well. Her father's voice carried the weight of a man betting everything on a single hand. 3 months, Mr. Thornfield. But understand this. If you fail, if you make her condition worse, you'll never practice anywhere in this territory again. Ezra nodded once, accepting the terms. Dr. Webb gathered his coat with professional disdain. I'll be monitoring the situation closely. For the patient's safety, of course. As the doctor departed, Celeste found herself alone with her father and the Irish veterinarian who had just promised to help her walk again. The storm had passed, leaving only the sound of rain dripping from the eaves. Dawn broke cold over the Beaumont ranch. Ezra arrived at the main house carrying rope, leather straps, and determination worn smooth by necessity. The equipment looked more suited for breaking horses than healing people. Celeste waited in the parlor, her wheelchair positioned like a throne of reluctance. She had spent the night reading her mother's letters again. Isabel's elegant script spoke of dreams for her daughter's future, dreams that died with a horse's stumble and 6 months of medical failure. We start with what works, Ezra said, setting down his makeshift apparatus. Your arms, your shoulders, the parts of you that remember how to fight. He had fashioned pulleys from barn hardware, weights from feed sacks filled with sand. The contraptions looked primitive compared to the polished instruments the Eastern doctors had brought. Celeste's hands remained folded in her lap. This looks like torture devices. Cavalry training, modified. Ezra tested the rope tension. I treated soldiers who learned to ride again after losing legs. The body adapts when the mind allows it. The mind. She spoke the words to the window, where morning light revealed the spot where her horse had thrown her. What if the mind doesn't want to adapt? Ezra's hands stilled on the ropes. He understood the deeper wound, the one that couldn't be seen or touched or treated with pulleys and weights. Then we start smaller, one breath, one movement, one moment of not giving up. The first session lasted 20 minutes. Celeste managed 3 lifts with the rope system before her arms shook with exhaustion. Ezra watched her struggle without offering help or hollow encouragement. He simply observed, adjusting the weight, noting what her body remembered and what it had forgotten. That's enough for today. I barely did anything. You did everything your body could handle. Tomorrow it will handle more. But tomorrow brought Dr. Webb. He arrived unannounced, his medical bag polished and his skepticism sharp as a scalpel. Behind him walked a woman Celeste had seen at church functions, but never spoken to. Margaret Webb carried herself with the practiced grace of a doctor's wife, all sympathy and social propriety. "I wanted to observe these treatments," Dr. Webb announced. "For the medical record." Margaret approached Celeste's wheelchair with the careful concern of someone comfortable around suffering. "My dear, you look exhausted. Are you certain this regimen isn't too strenuous?" The woman's touch was cool against Celeste's forehead, professional, caring. Yet something in her eyes flickered too quickly to catch. "I'm fine," Celeste replied, though her arms ached from the morning's work. Dr. Webb examined Ezra's equipment with the disdain of established medicine confronting frontier innovation. "This is highly irregular. Where are the protocols? The measured dosages?" "Every patient is different," Ezra replied. "The protocols adapt to the person, not the other way around." "That's not how medicine works, Mr. Thornfield. It's how healing works." The confrontation simmered in the parlor's polite confines. Margaret Webb moved between them with diplomatic smoothness, diffusing tension with offers of tea and gentle conversation about Celeste's progress. "I knew your mother," she said, settling into a chair beside the wheelchair. "Isabel was a remarkable woman, so strong, so determined to give you every advantage." Celeste's hands tightened on the chair's armrests. Few people spoke of her mother openly. The circumstances of her birth remained a delicate subject in proper Montana society. "She died when I was young. I don't remember much. She loved you desperately. I remember how she would speak of your future, the woman you would become." Margaret's voice carried practiced warmth. "I think she would want you to have every chance at recovery, even if the methods seem unconventional." The words should have brought comfort. Instead, they settled uneasily in Celeste's chest. Something about Margaret's smile felt rehearsed. Dr. Webb completed his examination of the equipment with professional disapproval. "I'll be filing a report with the Territorial Health Authority. These methods require proper oversight." After they left, Ezra helped Celeste with the afternoon session. Her movements were stiffer, more hesitant. The doctor's visit had planted seeds of doubt that bloomed in her muscles. "He's not wrong," she said, struggling with the rope exercises. "You're not a real doctor." "No." Ezra adjusted the weights. "I'm something else." "What?" "Someone who's seen the impossible happen enough times to believe in it." His hands guided hers on the ropes, showing her the proper grip, the angle of pull that would build strength without strain. His touch was careful, respectful of her dignity and her pain. "During the war, I watched a cavalry officer learn to walk again after a cannonball took his horse and most of his left leg. The field surgeon said he'd never stand. He was leading charges again within 6 months. What happened to him? He died in the last battle of the war, 3 days before Appomattox." Ezra's voice carried the weight of old grief. "But he died on his feet leading his men, not flat on his back giving up." The story hung between them, heavy with meaning. Celeste understood the lesson. Victory wasn't always about survival. Sometimes it was about refusing to surrender your dignity to despair. That evening, she sat in her room reading more of her mother's letters. Isabel's words spoke of dreams and determination, of a woman who refused to let society's limitations define her daughter's possibilities. But one letter felt different. The paper was older, more fragile, the handwriting shakier. "My dearest Celeste, if you are reading this, then I am gone and there are things you must know. My death may not be what it appears. Trust carefully. The enemies of your happiness wear friendly faces." The letter trembled in Celeste's hands. Her mother hadn't died of illness, as she had always been told. The letter spoke of threats, of people who wanted to see Isabel gone. But the names were coded, the details obscured by caution and fear. A knock at her door interrupted her racing thoughts. Ezra entered carrying 2 cups of coffee and the quiet concern that had become familiar. "Rough day. My mother didn't die of illness." The words spilled out before she could stop them. "She was murdered." Ezra set down the coffee and took the chair beside her wheelchair. He read the letter without comment, his face grave with understanding. "Do you know who?" "The letter is too careful. She was protecting someone by not naming names. Celeste's voice cracked with old grief made fresh. She knew she was going to die, and she couldn't even tell me who killed her. Maybe she was protecting you. The thought had occurred to her. Belle's murder might be connected to the same forces that now whispered about putting Celeste away in the asylum. People who found her existence inconvenient. They want me gone too, she said. The asylum is just a more acceptable way to do it. Ezra's hand found hers, calloused fingers gentle against her palm. Then we don't let them win. How do we fight people we can't even name? The same way your mother did. We get stronger, we get smarter, we refuse to disappear quietly. Outside her window, the Montana wind carved through the darkness, carrying secrets and sorrows across the endless plains. Celeste felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope exactly, but something harder, more useful. The next morning brought Margaret Webb again, this time alone. She arrived with fresh flowers and gentle inquiries about Celeste's progress. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," Margaret said, arranging roses in a crystal vase. "About your mother's dreams for you. What about them? She would want you to be realistic about your limitations. Sometimes acceptance is the highest form of courage." The words felt wrong. Isabel's letters spoke of defiance, not acceptance, of fighting for dreams even when the world conspired against them. "My mother never accepted limitations. Perhaps that's what killed her." Margaret's voice remained gentle, but something cold flickered beneath the sympathy. "Sometimes fighting the inevitable only brings more pain." After Margaret left, Celeste worked harder on the exercises. Her arms burned with effort, but the burn felt clean, honest, better than the sick feeling Margaret's words had left in her stomach. Ezra noticed her increased intensity. "What changed?" "I remembered something my mother wrote, about not trusting friendly faces. Good advice in any century." That afternoon, during their session, Celeste felt something impossible, a flicker of sensation in her left leg, brief as lightning but unmistakable. She gasped, her hand flying to her thigh. "I felt something." Ezra's eyes sharpened with professional interest. "Where?" "Here." She pressed her palm against her leg. "Just for a second." He knelt beside her wheelchair, his hands carefully examining her legs for any sign of returning function. His touch was clinical, respectful, but Celeste felt heat rise in her cheeks at his proximity. "Try to move your toes." She focused all her attention on her feet. For a moment, nothing. Then the smallest twitch in her left foot. "There." Ezra's voice carried quiet triumph. "Your body remembers more than the doctors thought." The breakthrough felt fragile as new ice. One moment of sensation against 6 months of nothing. But it was enough to kindle something dangerous in Celeste's chest. Hope. 3 weeks into the treatments, Celeste could move both feet. Small movements, barely perceptible, but enough to make Ezra's gray eyes brighten with possibility. She practiced in secret, late at night when the ranch house settled into sleep, willing her legs to remember what they had forgotten. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning, crisp with early autumn air. Celeste gripped the rope system, pulling herself upright with months of accumulated strength. Her legs, pale from disuse, trembled beneath her. Then, for one impossible moment, they held. She stood, not for long. Her muscles gave way after heartbeats, dropping her back into the wheelchair with jarring finality. But she had stood. Ezra witnessed it, his hands ready to catch her if she fell, his face carved with quiet triumph. How did it feel? Terrifying. Her voice shook with the memory of weight on her legs. Wonderful. They decided to keep the progress secret until she could sustain it longer. Trust had become a precious commodity since Margaret Webb's visits grew more frequent, her sympathy more cloying, her suggestions about the asylum more persistent. But secrets have weight. They press against the chest until breathing becomes difficult. That afternoon, Dr. Webb arrived with the territorial marshal and papers bearing official seals. His face carried the gravity of a man performing an unpleasant duty. "Miss Beaumont has shown no significant improvement," he announced to Thaddeus in the parlor. "The experimental treatments have been given adequate time to prove their worth." Marshal Thompson, A weathered man, uncomfortable with medical disputes, shifted his weight from boot to boot. The Territorial Health Authority has reviewed the case. They're concerned about the methods being used. Celeste's hands gripped her wheelchair arms. The metal felt cold as winter iron beneath her palms. "What exactly are you saying, doctor?" Thaddeus's voice carried the edge of a man protecting his own. "Mr. Thornfield is practicing medicine without proper credentials. His treatments could be causing additional damage to your daughter's spine." Dr. Webb opened his leather case, producing documents with practiced authority. "The asylum has agreed to accept her case immediately." "No," the word came from Celeste's throat raw with desperation. "I won't go. Sweetheart, maybe it's for the best." Her father's voice cracked with defeat. 3 weeks of hope crumbling under official pressure. "The doctors know what they're doing." "Do they?" Ezra stepped forward, his hands steady at his sides. "What improvement has traditional medicine offered her in 6 months?" Dr. Webb bristled at the challenge. "At least we haven't made her condition worse." "Haven't you?" Celeste's voice cut through the room sharp as broken glass. "You told me I was hopeless. You convinced me I was better off dead. How is that not making me worse?" The silence stretched taut between them. Marshal Thompson cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the raw emotion bleeding into his official duty. "Miss, the law is the law. This man ain't licensed to practice medicine on people. He's the only one who's helped me." "The help you think you've received may be imaginary," Dr. Webb said with professional gentleness. "False hope can create the illusion of improvement." Celeste felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. She could stand. She had stood. But revealing that progress meant exposing their secret before she was strong enough to sustain it. Her legs remained still beneath the blanket covering them. "You have 48 hours to cease all medical treatments," Marshal Thompson read from his papers. "After that, Mr. Thornfield will be arrested for practicing medicine without a license." The words fell into the parlor heavy as stones into still water. Ripples of consequence spread outward, touching everything. After the officials left, the house felt hollow. Thaddeus poured whiskey with hands that shook slightly. Ezra gathered his makeshift equipment, each piece a small defeat. "I'm sorry," her father said to no one in particular. "I thought we could fight this." "We can." Celeste's voice carried steel forged in desperation. "I won't let them win. What choice do we have? We prove them wrong." That evening, she worked alone in her room. The rope system Ezra had built creaked under her weight as she pulled herself upright again and again. Her legs shook with effort, muscles remembering their purpose through sheer will. By midnight, she could stand for 30 seconds. By dawn, nearly a minute. When Ezra arrived for what should have been their final session, Celeste waited in the center of the parlor. Not in her wheelchair, but standing beside it, gripping the back for support. His face went still with wonder and fear. "How long?" "Long enough." Her legs trembled with exhaustion, but she remained upright. "Help me do better." They had one day, 24 hours to accomplish what should have taken weeks. Ezra pushed aside the legal consequences and focused on the miracle happening in front of him. "Your balance needs work. Your strength is returning but inconsistent." His clinical assessment mixed with barely contained excitement. "We need to be strategic about tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "The town meeting. They'll want to formalize the commitment proceedings." Ezra's hands guided her through careful exercises. "If you can walk into that room, everything changes. And if I can't, then we'll face that when it comes." They practiced until her legs gave out. Practiced until walking became muscle memory overlaying months of paralysis. Practiced until the sun painted the western sky the color of old blood. Margaret Webb arrived as evening shadows lengthened across the ranch house porch. She carried soup and sympathy, her face arranged in expressions of gentle concern. "I heard about the marshal's visit. I'm so sorry, dear." Celeste accepted the soup with hands that ached from gripping support ropes. The broth was rich, warming, touched with herbs that made her tongue tingle strangely. "You've been so kind throughout all this. Your mother was a dear friend. I promised her I'd look after you if anything happened to her." The words should have brought comfort. Instead, They settled uneasily in Celeste's stomach alongside the soup. Something in Margaret's tone felt rehearsed, too practiced. You were with her when she died. At the very end, she was delirious with fever, saying the strangest things. Margaret's eyes grew distant with memory. She kept talking about enemies, about people who wanted to hurt you. The illness had clearly affected her mind. Celeste's spoon stilled in the bowl. Her mother's letter had mentioned enemies, had warned about trusting friendly faces. What did she say exactly? Nothing coherent, just fevered ramblings about threats that didn't exist. Margaret patted Celeste's hand with cool fingers. I stayed with her until the end. She passed peacefully. The soup grew cold as they talked. Margaret's version of Isabel's death painted a picture of natural illness taking a confused woman, but the letter suggested something darker, more deliberate. After Margaret left, Celeste felt strange, tired beyond what the day's exertion should have caused. Her vision blurred at the edges, and her stomach churned with sudden nausea. Ezra found her pale and shaking in her wheelchair. What's wrong? I don't know, I feel sick, dizzy. He knelt beside her, his hands checking for fever. Her skin felt clammy, her pulse rapid and weak. What did you eat today? Just the soup Margaret brought. His face went still with understanding, the pieces clicking together in his mind with terrible clarity. How long after she left did you start feeling sick? Maybe an hour. Ezra's hands tightened into fists. We need to get you to bed. Sleep it off. But sleep brought nightmares. Dreams of her mother's death, of friendly faces hiding murderous intent, of wheelchairs that became coffins. Celeste woke at dawn feeling hollowed out, her newfound strength scattered to the winds. The town meeting was in 6 hours. She tried to stand and collapsed immediately. Her legs, which had supported her the day before, now felt lifeless as winter branches. Whatever progress they had made vanished in the space between one sunset and the next sunrise. Ezra helped her back into the wheelchair, his face grim with suspicion and defeat. I can't do it, she whispered. I can't walk. I know. The soup. I know. They sat in silence as morning light crept across the parlor floor. The town would gather at 10 o'clock to decide her fate. Dr. Webb would present his evidence. Marshal Thompson would read his orders, and she would sit in her wheelchair, apparently proving their point about the futility of unconventional treatments. We're going to lose, she said. Maybe. But we're not going to surrender. At 9:30, Thaddeus helped lift her wheelchair into the wagon for the ride to town. The October air bit sharp with coming winter. Celeste pulled her blanket closer and tried to summon strength from somewhere deeper than muscle and bone. The courthouse was packed. Half the territory seemed to have come to witness the spectacle of the cattle baron's daughter and the Irish horse doctor who thought he could work miracles. Dr. Webb sat at the front table, his papers organized, his case prepared. Margaret Webb occupied the front row, her face a mask of sympathetic concern. Marshal Thompson called the meeting to order. The legal machinery began its inexorable grind toward conclusion. And Celeste sat in her wheelchair, silent and still, gathering what remained of her strength for one last attempt at the impossible. The courthouse buzzed with anticipation as Dr. Webb rose to address the gathered crowd. His voice carried the authority of established medicine, each word measured and damning. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here because an unlicensed practitioner has endangered the life of a vulnerable young woman. Miss Beaumont's condition has not only failed to improve, it has deteriorated under his care. Celeste sat motionless in her wheelchair, the morning's weakness still coursing through her veins. The crowd's eyes weighed upon her, measuring her failure against their expectations. But Ezra watched Margaret Webb instead. The doctor's wife sat rigid in the front row, her hands clasped too tightly, her breathing too controlled. The performance of a woman maintaining composure while her mind worked furiously. Mr. Thornfield promised miraculous recovery, Dr. Webb continued. What he delivered was false hope and medical quackery that has left Miss Beaumont worse than before. Marshal Thompson nodded along, his duty clear in his weathered face. The law had spoken. The only question remaining was the speed of its execution. Thaddeus stood to defend his daughter's choice, but his words carried the hollow ring of defeat. My daughter consented to the treatments. She believed in the possibility of recovery. Consent given without proper medical understanding is meaningless, Dr. Webb replied. Mr. Thornfield exploited her desperation for his own purposes. The accusation hung in the courthouse air thick as smoke. Celeste felt the crowd's sympathy shift toward pity. The poor crippled girl, deceived by false promises. Better to put her somewhere safe where real doctors could care for her properly. Margaret Webb dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, the picture of feminine distress. I've tried to be supportive, but watching this dear girl suffer has broken my heart. Her voice trembled with practiced emotion. The crowd murmured approval of her compassion. But Ezra's medical training had taught him to observe symptoms others missed. Margaret's distress appeared genuine, yet her pupils remained steady. Her breathing controlled despite the apparent tears. Her color never flushed with real emotion. The performance of grief without its substance. After the meeting adjourned with Marshal Thompson's promise to execute the commitment order within days, Ezra helped Celeste back to the wagon. Her weakness had deepened during the proceedings, her skin taking on a sallow cast that spoke of something more than exhaustion. "The soup," she whispered as he lifted her into the wagon bed. "I know, she did something to me. I believe so." The ride back to the ranch passed in contemplative silence. Celeste dozed fitfully against Ezra's shoulder while he studied the pattern of her symptoms, the sudden onset, the specific targeting of muscle function, the timing that perfectly coincided with Margaret's visit. Someone with medical knowledge had crafted this deterioration. That evening, while Celeste slept under the influence of whatever had been slipped into her soup, Ezra conducted his own investigation. He searched her room for evidence, his hands methodical as they examined bottles, cups, anything that might have carried poison. In the small waste basket beside her dresser, he found Margaret's soup bowl. A thin residue clung to the porcelain, barely visible but present. He scraped the residue into a small envelope, sealing it carefully. Medical training had taught him to recognize the signs of plant-based toxins. Certain herbs could temporarily paralyze muscle function without permanent damage. Used skillfully, they could simulate disease progression while leaving no lasting trace. But Margaret Webb had made one mistake. She had volunteered too much information about Isabel's death. The next morning, Ezra rode into town alone. The Territorial Records Office kept death certificates, court proceedings, and other official documents that painted pictures of the past. Isabel Beaumont's death certificate bore Dr. Webb's signature. Cause of death listed as fever and delirium. No autopsy performed. No investigation ordered. But the timing troubled Ezra. Isabel had died 3 days after revising her will to leave everything to Celeste. 3 days after writing her final letter warning of enemies wearing friendly faces. He dug deeper into the records, property transfers, business partnerships, marriage certificates. Margaret Webb, née Margaret Holloway, had been engaged to Thaddeus Beaumont before Isabel entered his life. The engagement had been broken when Thaddeus chose his mistress over his socially appropriate fiancée. Margaret had married Harrison Webb 6 months later. A rebound marriage that elevated her social status while keeping her in Thaddeus's orbit. For 20 years, she had watched the man who rejected her raise another woman's child. Watched Celeste grow up in luxury that should have belonged to Margaret's children. Watched a half-breed girl inherit an empire that proper society would have given to Margaret. The motive crystallized in Ezra's mind clear as mountain water. He returned to the ranch as sunset painted the sky the color of old blood. Celeste waited in the parlor, still weak but alert enough to focus on his discoveries. "She killed my mother. The evidence suggests it. And now she's killing me." Slowly, carefully, making it look like treatment failure while positioning herself to appear compassionate. Celeste's hands gripped her wheelchair arms until her knuckles went white. 20 years of grief crystallizing into understanding. Her mother's warnings finally making sense. "We need proof. We have some. The soup residue might show traces of whatever she used. Your symptoms match plant-based paralytic agents. Might isn't enough. Ezra knelt beside her wheelchair, his gray eyes steady with purpose. Then we get more. They spent the evening planning. Margaret would return soon, probably with more soup, more sympathy, more poison disguised as kindness. This time they would be ready. She needs to believe she's winning, Celeste said. That I'm getting worse under your care. Can you do that? Pretend to deteriorate. I've been pretending to be weaker than I am my whole life. At least now it serves a purpose. The next afternoon brought Margaret Webbright on schedule. She carried a basket of food and wore the expression of a woman performing Christian duty despite personal cost. I brought more soup, dear. You need to keep your strength up. Celeste accepted the bowl with trembling hands that only partly feigned weakness. The soup smelled of herbs and good intentions, but death wore many disguises. You're so kind to keep visiting. Your mother made me promise to look after you. Margaret settled into her usual chair, watching Celeste with eyes that catalogued every sign of decline. She was delirious at the end, but she knew she was dying. Made me swear to protect you from those who would do you harm. The irony hung between them sharp as winter air. The woman who had murdered Isabel now claimed to honor her final wishes. What exactly did she say about enemies? Oh, you know how fever affects the mind. She imagined threats everywhere, talked about people wanting to steal your inheritance, hurt your chances in life. Margaret's voice carried dismissive sympathy. I assured her that you would always have friends watching over you. Celeste lifted the spoon to her lips, then hesitated. I'm not very hungry today. You must eat, dear, you're wasting away. Maybe later. Margaret's eyes sharpened with frustration quickly masked by concern. The soup will get cold. I made it specially for you. I'll heat it up later. The standoff stretched between them, two women locked in a dance whose steps they both knew by heart. Margaret needed Celeste to consume the poison. Celeste needed to avoid it while appearing to cooperate. Finally, Margaret stood with a sigh of maternal disappointment. Very well, but promise me you'll eat something today. You're worrying everyone with how frail you've become. After she left, Celeste poured the soup into a jar for Ezra to examine. The liquid had a slightly oily sheen that hadn't been present in previous bowls. Margaret was escalating the dosage. Time was running out. That evening, Ezra's analysis of the soup confirmed their suspicions. Plant alkaloids designed to mimic disease progression, carefully measured to avoid immediate death while ensuring long-term decline. She's been poisoning me slowly for weeks, Celeste said, making my recovery impossible while appearing to support it. The pattern fits. Every time you showed improvement, she visited with food or drink. How long do we have? Ezra's face went grave with medical certainty. At this dosage, maybe days before permanent damage occurs. The truth settled between them heavy as gravestone marble. Margaret Webb had perfected the art of murder disguised as mercy. She had killed Isabel with the same patient malice now aimed at Celeste. But this time, her victim knew the game being played. Tomorrow she'll expect me to be worse, Celeste said, weaker, closer to giving up. Can you manage that performance? Watch me. Outside the ranch house windows, Montana wind carried the scent of coming winter across the endless plains. Change was in the air, sharp and cold and inevitable. The courthouse filled again 3 days later, the same faces arranged in the same seats, waiting for the inevitable conclusion. Marshal Thompson had called the final hearing to formalize Celeste's commitment to the territorial asylum. She sat in her wheelchair at the front of the room, appearing frailer than before. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor. Her hands trembled against the blanket covering her legs. The picture of a young woman whose condition had deteriorated beyond hope. Margaret Webb occupied her usual seat in the front row, radiating quiet satisfaction disguised as sorrowful concern. Her performance had reached its crescendo. Soon the inconvenient daughter would disappear behind asylum walls, and 20 years of patient hatred would finally bear fruit. Dr. Webb rose to present his final assessment. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Beaumont's decline under Mr. Thornfield's care has been swift and alarming. She now shows signs of systemic failure that threaten her very survival. Thaddeus sat beside his daughter, defeat carved into every line of his weathered face. The richest man in the territory, reduced to helpless witness as the law prepared to take his child away. Furthermore, Dr. Webb continued, I have evidence that Mr. Thornfield's treatments have introduced toxic substances into Miss Beaumont's system. The accusation hit the courthouse like a thunderclap. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Dr. Webb produced a glass vial containing residue from the rope exercises. This sample shows traces of industrial lubricants used on Mr. Thornfield's makeshift equipment. Miss Beaumont has been slowly poisoned by the very apparatus meant to heal her. Ezra's jaw tightened with understanding. The evidence had been planted, carefully crafted to frame him for Margaret's crimes. The rope system he had built from honest materials now appeared to be a vehicle for poisoning. Marshal Thompson examined the vial with the gravity of a man confronting irrefutable proof. Mr. Thornfield, do you have any response to these charges? I do. Ezra stood, his voice carrying across the courthouse clear and unwavering. But first, I'd like Miss Beaumont to tell you something herself. All eyes turned to Celeste. She sat motionless in her wheelchair, appearing too weak to lift her head. The perfect picture of a dying girl unable to defend her would-be savior. Then she spoke. Margaret Webb murdered my mother. The words fell into the courthouse silence heavy as stones into still water. The crowd sat frozen, uncertain they had heard correctly. 20 years ago, she poisoned Isabelle Beaumont out of jealousy and greed. Celeste's voice grew stronger with each word. And for the past month, she's been poisoning me the same way. Margaret Webb went rigid in her seat, her carefully maintained composure cracking around the edges. That's impossible. The girl is delirious from the treatments. Am I? Celeste gripped the arms of her wheelchair and pushed herself upright. Her legs shook with effort, muscles remembering their purpose despite weeks of chemical suppression. She stood facing the crowd, swaying but defiant. The courthouse erupted. Voices rose in confusion and amazement as the paralyzed girl proved her accusers wrong simply by standing. Impossible, Dr. Webb stammered. She couldn't walk yesterday. Because yesterday I consumed the poison your wife put in my soup. Celeste's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Today I didn't. Margaret Webb bolted for the courthouse door, her mask of sympathy finally shattered. But Marshal Thompson blocked her path, his hand resting on his pistol grip. I think you'd better sit back down, ma'am. This is ridiculous, Margaret said, but her voice carried the tremor of exposed guilt. You can't believe the ravings of a sick girl and an unlicensed quack. Ezra stepped forward, producing the evidence they had gathered. We have samples of the poisoned soup. Analysis shows plant alkaloids designed to mimic paralysis symptoms. He handed Marshal Thompson a folder thick with documentation. We also have Miss Beaumont's mother's final letter, warning of enemies who wanted to destroy her daughter, and territorial records showing Mrs. Webb's engagement to Thaddeus Beaumont before Isabelle entered his life. The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the unfolding drama. 20 years of whispered speculation about Isabelle's death suddenly taking on sinister new meaning. Margaret was supposed to marry my father, Celeste continued, her legs holding steady despite months of enforced weakness. When he chose my mother instead, she married Dr. Webb but never forgot her jealousy. These are wild accusations, Dr. Webb protested, but his eyes darted to his wife with growing horror, the pieces clicking together in his mind as he realized how thoroughly he had been used. Margaret's composure crumbled completely. You don't understand what it was like, watching him raise that woman's bastard while I had nothing. She stole my life, my future, everything that should have been mine. The confession spilled out of her like poison from a lanced wound, 20 years of suppressed rage finally finding voice. Isabelle had to die. She was corrupting him, turning him against proper society, and her daughter was just as dangerous. Mixed blood, thinking she deserved to inherit a white man's empire. The The racist venom in her words hit the courthouse like a physical blow. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, confronted with the ugly truth beneath Margaret's charitable facade. "So you killed them both," Marshal Thompson said, his voice heavy with disgust. "I tried to be merciful with the girl. The asylum would have been kinder than what her mother got." Margaret's eyes blazed with unrepentant hatred. "But she wouldn't cooperate, wouldn't accept her place." Thaddeus stood from his seat, his massive frame trembling with contained fury. "You murdered the woman I loved. You tried to murder my daughter." "The woman you should have loved was standing right in front of you," Margaret spat. "But you chose your exotic pet instead." The words hung in the courthouse air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Margaret Webb had stripped away all pretense, revealing the poisonous core of jealousy and bigotry that had driven her to double murder. Dr. Webb stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "Harrison, you had to know," Margaret said desperately. "You had to suspect." "I suspected incompetence," he replied quietly. "Not evil." Marshal Thompson stepped forward with iron restraints. "Margaret Webb, you're under arrest for the murders of Isabel Beaumont and the attempted murder of Celeste Beaumont." As the shackles closed around Margaret's wrists, she fixed Celeste with a stare full of impotent fury. "You think this changes anything? You're still what you are, still an outsider in a white man's world." "Maybe," Celeste replied, standing straighter despite her exhaustion. "But I'm an outsider who can walk." The crowd fell silent as Margaret was led away, her 20-year masquerade finally ended. Justice moved slowly in the Montana Territory, but it moved. Dr. Webb approached Celeste with the humility of a man confronting his own blindness. "Miss Beaumont, I owe you an apology. My professional arrogance nearly cost you your life. You were protecting what you believed was right. I was protecting my ego." He turned to Ezra with grudging respect. "Your methods were unorthodox, but they worked. Perhaps there's room for innovation alongside tradition." As the courthouse emptied, Celeste remained standing in the center of the room. Her legs ached from the effort, but she refused to sit down. Not yet, not when standing felt like victory itself. Ezra moved to her side, ready to catch her if she fell. "How do you feel?" "Tired, angry, grateful." She looked at him with eyes clear of the despair that had haunted them for months. "Alive." Thaddeus approached his daughter with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I'm sorry I doubted you. Sorry I almost let them take you away. You were trying to protect me. I was trying to protect myself from watching you suffer." He knelt beside her wheelchair, humbling himself before the daughter he had failed. "Can you forgive a foolish old man?" Celeste placed her hand on her father's gray head, feeling the weight of his remorse. "We both survived, Papa. That's what matters now." Outside the courthouse, Montana wind carried the scent of coming winter across the territory. But inside, the air had cleared of old lies and poisonous secrets. For the first time in 20 years, truth had room to breathe. 1 year later, autumn painted the Montana Territory in shades of gold and possibility. The Isabel Beaumont Rehabilitation Center stood where an old barn had once housed broken equipment and forgotten dreams. Celeste walked across the polished wooden floor, her gait measured but steady. The braces Ezra had designed from leather and steel gave her legs the support they needed, while allowing the freedom she had fought so hard to reclaim. The first patient waited in the treatment room. Billy Morrison, 17 years old, thrown from a horse 3 weeks prior. His spine had been crushed in the same way Celeste's had been, but his eyes still carried hope instead of despair. "They say I'll never walk again," he said from his wheelchair. "They said the same about me." Celeste knelt beside him, her hands checking the sensation in his legs with practiced expertise. "The question isn't what they say. It's what you're willing to fight for." Ezra entered carrying the treatment apparatus they had refined over months of trial and error. Rope and pulleys, weights and leather straps, all designed to coax strength from damaged bodies and hope from broken spirits. "Ready to begin?" Billy nodded, fear and determination warring in his young face. The rehabilitation techniques they had developed drew visitors from across the territory. Doctors came to observe, some skeptical, others eager to learn. Word spread through medical journals and telegraph lines about the Irish veterinarian and the cattle baron's daughter who had turned tragedy into triumph. Dr. Webb visited twice a month, his professional rivalry transformed into grudging collaboration. Margaret's imprisonment had humbled him, stripped away the arrogance that had nearly cost Celeste her life. "Your success rate with spinal injuries is remarkable," he admitted, watching Celeste guide Billy through his exercises. "The medical establishment could learn from your methods." The medical establishment could learn to listen to patients instead of just examining them, she replied without malice. The center bore her mother's name but Celeste's vision. Treatment rooms filled with innovative equipment, sleeping quarters for patients who traveled long distances, a library where she researched new techniques and documented their successes. Most importantly, it was a place where broken people could learn to be whole again. Thaddeus had funded the construction with the fervor of a man seeking redemption. His cattle empire provided the financial foundation, but his daughter provided the heart. "Your mother would be proud," he said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains purple. "She would want to know we're helping others avoid her fate." Margaret Webb had been sentenced to life imprisonment in the territorial penitentiary. Her trial had revealed the calculated nature of both murders, the patient malice that had masqueraded as Christian charity for 20 years. Justice had been served, but Celeste found little satisfaction in revenge. The real victory lay in the patients who learned to walk again, the families who didn't lose their children to despair. Billy Morrison took his first supported steps on a Tuesday morning crisp with early winter air. His legs shook with effort, but they held. Celeste walked beside him, her own braces creaking softly with each measured pace. "How does it feel?" "Terrifying. Wonderful." The same words she had spoken a year ago when hope first returned to her paralyzed limbs. The cycle of healing continued, passed from one patient to the next. That evening, Ezra found her in the center's main room, updating patient records by lamplight. Her handwriting had grown stronger over the months, no longer trembling with weakness or uncertainty. "Long day, good day." She set down her pen and stretched, her back aching pleasantly from honest work. "Billy walked 20 steps today, and yesterday, 15. Progress measured in single steps, small victories that accumulated into larger triumphs. The same patients that had brought her back from paralysis now served others fighting the same battle. Ezra settled into the chair beside her desk, close enough that she could smell the honest scent of soap and leather that always clung to him. 12 months of shared struggle had forged something deeper than gratitude between them. "The Territorial Health Authority wants to fund expansion," he said. 3 more centers across Montana. We'll need more staff, more equipment, more hope." She looked at him in the lamplight, seeing the man who had whispered a promise in her darkest hour and then made it reality through sheer determination. His gray eyes still carried sadness for the wife he couldn't save, but now they also held purpose. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Leaving veterinary work for this?" "I never left healing. I just found better patients." The words hung between them, warm as the fire crackling in the center's hearth. Outside, Montana wind carried the promise of snow across the endless plains. Their hands found each other across the desk, calloused fingers intertwining with quiet certainty. No grand declarations or passionate embraces. Just 2 people who had found strength in shared purpose and love in mutual respect. "The center needs a medical director," she said. "It has one. It needs a proper doctor on staff." Ezra's smile carried years of earned contentment. "Are you offering me a job, Miss Beaumont?" "I'm offering you a future." The proposal contained layers of meaning that went far beyond professional partnership. They had built something together that would outlast them both, a legacy of healing that honored the dead while serving the living. Dr. Harrison Webb arrived the next morning to find them working side by side in the treatment room. Billy Morrison walked between parallel bars while Celeste counted his steps and Ezra adjusted the support system. "Remarkable progress," Webb admitted. "The medical journals are calling your techniques revolutionary." "They're not revolutionary," Celeste replied. "They're just human." That afternoon, she stood before the bronze plaque mounted beside the center's front door. Isabel Beaumont Rehabilitation Center, founded in memory of a woman who refused to accept limitations. The dedication ceremony had drawn people from across the territory. Ranchers and townspeople, patients and their families, doctors and doubters who had become believers. As sunset approached, the crowd dispersed, leaving Celeste and Ezra alone on the center's front porch. The mountains loomed purple against the darkening sky, eternal and unchanging, but the people beneath them had changed, grown stronger, found hope where none had existed before. "What happens next?" Ezra asked. "We keep walking." Celeste's hand found his, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. "One step at a time." Inside the center, Billy Morrison practiced his evening exercises, his young legs growing stronger with each repetition. Tomorrow would bring new patients, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that healing was possible even in the darkest circumstances. The wind carried the scent of coming snow, but also the promise of spring. Seasons changed, bringing both endings and beginnings, death and rebirth, paralysis and recovery. Celeste had learned to walk again, but more importantly, she had learned to help others find their own path from darkness into light. The girl who had lost all hope until a struggling veterinarian whispered his promise had become a woman who offered that same promise to others. Her mother's murderer sat behind prison walls. Justice finally served after 20 years of patience. Her father had found redemption through supporting her mission. The community that had once whispered about putting her away now celebrated her achievements. But the true victory lay in the simple act of placing one foot in front of the other, refusing to surrender to circumstances that seemed insurmountable. Walking had become more than movement. It had become defiance, hope, the physical manifestation of a spirit that refused to be broken. As stars emerged in the Montana sky, Celeste and Ezra walked together into their shared future, their footsteps echoing with quiet triumph across the wooden porch. Behind them, the Isabel Beaumont Rehabilitation Center stood ready to welcome tomorrow's broken souls and teach them the most fundamental truth of human existence. Sometimes the greatest victories are measured not in miles traveled, but in single steps taken when the world insists that walking is impossible. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.